You make that same point, you made it earlier about the damage. The IAEA said that the nuclear facility had very significant damage. I think they were referring to the Fordo there. There's been satellite images showing craters. Trump claimed there was monumental damage and the Fordo was obliterated. And Israeli officials, surprisingly, Israeli officials are the ones that indicated that Fordo was not destroyed. That's Israeli officials. Why do you think there's that discrepancy between what the US has said, what the IAEA has said, and what Israel said? They said it was severely damaged but not destroyed, and they did suggest that Iran may have moved materials and equipment before the strike, which is what the US, I think, admitted. They don't know where the nuclear, the enriched uranium has been moved to. So two questions there. Number one is, why do you think there is that discrepancy between the reports from the US and Israel? And number two, do you also disagree with the amount of damage that was caused to those facilities, which you kind of hinted at before?
Well, I don't know what was done at Fordo. I don't know how the IAEA knows what was done at Fordo. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have inspectors on the ground. My understanding is that the Iranians sealed off both of the major entrances and exits from Fordo with soil to prevent any weapons from coming inside. So the tunnel is blocked. That's what we bombed. We bombed a blocked tunnel. We didn't bomb because that tunnel then has to penetrate deeply into the center of the mountain where you have ridges overhead, where the actual cascade facilities are, where the cascade halls are. We didn't bomb those. So I don't know what people are talking about when they talk about damage done to Fordo. We won't know until cameras go inside. We don't know. Did the weapon penetrate significantly? Did the blast done create a cascading effect of collapse that collapsed the tunnels? Because if you collapse the tunnels, you've done significant damage. It can be very difficult to get into the facility. But if all you've done is block a tunnel that was already blocked, you've done nothing. Plus, if the facility had been emptied, what's the point? Remember, Fordo was not purpose-built. This is something maybe people don't quite understand. Fordo was built in the aftermath of the 2006 threat by Dick Cheney and George W. Bush to bomb Iran. At that time, the Iranians went all around the country and excavated evacuation sites, that is, underground facilities where they could rapidly move high-value equipment and hide it. And Fordo was one of these sites. And the Iranians said, after the threat was made to bomb Natanz, Iran said, we have to safeguard our investment. So they converted Fordo into a nuclear enrichment hall. But it wasn't designed to do that, and it wasn't the only one there. There are scores of Fordos throughout Iran that we don't know anything about. And so we bombed an empty facility, and we know it was empty. When civilian satellite imagery from, what was it, 19 of June shows trucks lined up pulling stuff out, I could guarantee you that our satellite imagery from the United States shows the same thing with even greater detail. So we knew it was an empty site.
Why weren't they struck, though? Why weren't those trucks struck as soon as they were spotted?
That's a question only the President of the United States can answer. Remember,
by Israel, not by the US, by Israel, though. Israel was already involved in Iran on a daily basis.
Reactive response is not as what you think it is. Okay, so I'm planning an attack. It's not as easy as people think. Planes just don't take off and bomb. You need to gather the intelligence where the radars are, because Iran still has functioning radars, where the anti-aircraft artillery envelopes are, potential air interdiction. All this path has to be in, and then you have to plan your attack route. You have to bring in your electronic countermeasures. You have to have your refuelers. The bottom line is you build this whole strike package with a weapons release, either from a distance or nearer to the target, and you have to plan your exit routes, and all this has to be planned in conjunction with other strikes that are taking place. And so in the middle of this planning, and remember, you're beginning your plan based upon an intelligence picture that can be updated somewhat with new electronic data. But the physical aspect of it, where you're going to bomb, has already been. The targets are picked on the ground. Now, if they come out and they say, no, we need you to shift this over here to bomb this because we saw trucks. Well, when did you see the trucks? How many hours ago did you see the trucks? When did the analyst look at it? When did that report make it to officials who said, oh, this is something we may want to attack? And when did it appear before a targeteer, who then has to redevelop a strike package, get all the assets rediverted to that, and by the time they launch and get going, the target's gone. It's a mobile target, mobile relocatable target. So it's not as easy as everybody says in this targeting business. It's not like, oh, we saw the truck. It's not movies, guys. Oh, we saw the truck, redivert this resource that instantly fires a missile into it. If it were only that easy, it's not.
Yeah, I assume so, because Israel was really quick in striking Iranian missile launches. As soon as Iran started launching missiles, Israel was immediately there in the air striking those launches. That's why I assume they'd be able to do the same with the trucks. Yeah, but obviously, as you said, it's a lot more complex.
But let me just make clarification of that, too. You say Israel was there. Let's look at the Iraqi scenario. The Iraqis would not put a Scud launcher in a launch position until they received the all-clear signal about air defense. We had F-15Es flying at night that would be 5 to 7 minutes away from the launch site. The Iraqis wouldn't fire a missile if it was 3 to 2 minutes away, because they knew what time it took to evacuate, and they wouldn't bring it in if it could be detected. This is the Iraqis. And we didn't destroy a single launcher. They would fire their launcher, run it to a hide site, cover it with the tarp to reduce the IR signature. Our F-15s would come in, and they couldn't find the target and hit it. And so now I'm to believe that the Iranians, who have been preparing for this very moment, are going to not clear the airspace, not say, oh no, Israeli planes are hovering, they're over here, and they're going to take a valuable asset, put it out there, and let it be launched. I can guarantee you that the vast majority of what the Israelis struck are decoys, sophisticated decoys. The Iraqis did the same thing. They had a decoy unit that put out, realistic-looking decoys. If you remember Durant, the warrant officer that was captured in the Black Hawk Down incident, he flew Black Hawk DAP missions, direct action penetrator missions, and his helicopter famously strafed one of these decoys. They thought it was real. They believed they were killing the real thing. General Schwarzkopf believed they were killing the real thing. It was a decoy. We didn't kill a single Scud launcher, and the Iranians have studied this war. They've studied all capabilities. I am here to tell you right now, take what the Israelis are saying with a grain of salt, just like take what we said during the Gulf War with a grain of salt. If they're killing any launchers, it's a very small number. If you're hitting something, there's the old saying, if it looks too good to be true, it's probably not true. If you're an Israeli aircraft flying over Iran and you come upon a missile launcher, it's probably too good to be true. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't successfully interdicted. I've looked at some of the images that look like there might be a missile ready to be raised to get struck. Then tip of the hat to the Israelis, because that's a very hard thing to do. But this concept where you see this missile launcher just sitting there with a missile in its bed, just sitting there, that's a decoy.
There's been some footage, talking about decoy, there's been some footage, Israeli footage of them striking those launchers. But then a lot of people are saying because there's no secondary explosion, it means it's a decoy. Is that true? Is it as simple as that to tell us something's a decoy?
This is what I told the helicopter pilots. I said, you guys think that's a Scud? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, let me tell you what, if it was a Scud, you wouldn't be here, because you were launching your strafing mission well within the lethal radius of the fuel exploding. The fact that it didn't blow up means it wasn't a Scud. If you look at these things, what you're seeing is a standard explosion signature from the munition dropped. If you're not seeing a massive secondary explosion, if you're not seeing solid rocket fuel pinwheeling away, it's a decoy.
I want to talk about Israel's strategy now compared to what we saw earlier. So initially when the war started, what Israel said and what everyone assumes is that Israel's goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. Then when I spoke to the spokesperson, I think it was the ambassador at the time, he said, and Israel said that officially as well, the operation is to destroy their nuclear facilities, but also their ballistic missile program. So the scope has increased. And there's been talks about a potential regime change. Now, we know that Israel's now bombing different targets. They're no longer bombing the missile launchers and missile stockpiles and nuclear facilities. They bombed the IRGC security offices. So they're expanding their operation, their targets. The clock, the destruction of Israel clock, which is very symbolic, I understand. And they've struck that. They've even struck a prison in Evin, I think it was. What does that say about Israel's strategy today versus a strategy a few days ago? Are they being emboldened by successes they've had initially?
I wouldn't say they're emboldened by the successes. I think they're confronting the failures. Again, let's just break this thing down. What made the Iranian program problematic from the perspective of the Israelis and the United States was the 60% enriched uranium combined with cascades of IR6, IR8 high capacity centrifuges, because this allowed the Iranians within a very short period of time to create weapons grade uranium. Israel hasn't touched that. So if your goal was to eliminate Iran's bomb making capability, you haven't done that. Not only have you not done that, you've created now within Iran people who are saying this is what we must do. So Israel's actually made a much more dangerous situation for it on the nuclear side. And that's a statement of fact, and the Israelis know it. They have made a strategic error. On the ballistic missiles, they've gone after production facilities. But again, the Iranians know, just assuming, because this is what I would have done if I were counter, but they know what their layout looks like. And they know what the world knows. They know that everybody knows that Parchin is a major missile production facility with easily recognizable, production halls, etc. The key isn't that piece of, what's on the ground. That can be rebuilt. You just got to pour concrete, move dirt, and it's rebuilt. The key is the design. Once you know how to build a hypersonic missile, once you've solved that problem, you can reconstitute that in a heartbeat. And the sensitive equipment that was done doing that, it's hidden in the bottom of mountains we don't even know about. So Israel has failed on this regard, and they have failed to interdict Iran's ballistic missile stockpiles because advanced missiles keep hitting Israel. So now Israel's in the final end game, and that's regime change. That's their last option, because the only way that they can permanently stop Iran's nuclear program and stop Iran's ballistic missile program is to achieve a change in regimes that will agree to voluntarily give up both of these programs. So what Israel's doing right now, I believe, is striking security facilities to diminish the stature of these facilities by striking RGC headquarters. You show the Iranian people that the RGC is not infallible, they're not invincible, they can be bombed. You try and suppress police stations, etc. And next thing you know, you have an uprising. This is what we did. If you remember Operation Desert Fox, the United States ran it against Iraq in December of 1998. We did a very similar strike where we came in and we hit various headquarters under the belief that then we could get a division to move towards Baghdad, take over, get generals who were commanding a division in the south to make a move and come over. It didn't work. When you start bombing a nation, the people don't go against their government. They tend to close in around their government. And today the Iranian people appear to be, and even the Israelis and the Americans acknowledge this, more closely aligned with the theocracy than ever before. So Israel's in its desperate final stage of, if we can achieve regime change, then we can solve these two problems. And because they're not going to be able to achieve regime change, this is why you see the Israelis picking up the phone saying, we got to bring this thing to an end. Okay, it's over. We got to stop this thing now, because they're getting hit hard. And it's going to be let's see what happens to Israel when this war ends. How many Israelis stay in Israel? Because that's it's problematic. People don't want to spend their lives, raise their family, knowing that at any minute waves of Iranian missiles can come in and cause havoc. And so Israel's got to be really careful not to hit one of these existential tipping points, which is demographic flow out of the country. And so Israel, and I believe the Israeli politicians, this is why they shut the borders. They're not letting anybody out. And the reason why is they don't want to create panic. And because if you open the borders and people start fleeing, panic becomes addictive and contagious, and off they go. So the Israelis want to end this war. They want to bring in a sense of stability. And then they're going to, lift the restrictions. But how can they rebuild? What is necessary to rebuild? Can they afford to rebuild? Because every day that this goes by, the Iranians are destroying infrastructure that's extraordinarily expensive to replace. They just hit the Ashdod power generation plant. And that's problematic for Israel.
By the way, if you look at the news at the bottom, Scott, just think about it, how we've sleepwalked into this. This has essentially become a regional war. I know it's not a full-blown war where other countries are involved, but UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait have closed their airspace. Bahrain was just hit. No, Qatar was just hit. Iran and Israel are in a direct war. Lebanon was, just got out of a war with Hezbollah and Israel. And obviously there's still war in Gaza. This has become a regional war. what's the risks of this escalating further and becoming an overdrawn long-term conflict involving potentially other nations? Because in our early discussion, we're talking about how the likelihood that the US wants to declare a win. They don't want boots on the ground. They don't want to be dragged into a war. It's not a good look for Trump and his administration. Israel, you said, wants an end to the war because they're being hit hard. Iran, they do want to, deter Israel from future attacks by striking them hard, but they also can't sustain this forever. They've lost significant commanders and infrastructure as well, and they're worried about a potential regime change and Khamenei being assassinated. China doesn't want a war. Russia could probably be the only country that benefits from this. Europe doesn't want a war. So what do you think is the risk of this actually escalating, despite most parties involved not wanting it to escalate?
I would just, from my perspective, correct too the foundational assumptions made. Iran's not afraid of regime change. That's a Western perception. Iran doesn't fear regime change. And Iran's not running out of anything. I don't know how to emphasize this enough. In 2006, Dick Cheney and George W. Bush were planning an attack on Iran at that time. It was planned for the month of March. I think there was a holiday, the Nowruz festival, 10-day holiday. The Iranians shut it down and they closed everything. They were ready to fight. At that time, they broke Iran into 57 different self-sustaining military districts because they believed it was a ground invasion, that the U.S. would seek regime change. And so they built a design that was intended to have Iran survive regime change. Each one of these 57 military districts has been equipped and sustained for 2 years of fighting. 2 years. The Iranians can ride this thing out for 2 years. And if anybody doesn't believe that, just watch them. Israel's not doing any damage to Iran strategically, none whatsoever. You don't see any panic on the side of the Iranians. No panic at all, because they have prepared for this. Israel hasn't prepared for what's happening to it. That's the difference. So I think it's wrong to assume that Iran is somehow in a panic state, worried about any. They're not worried about anything. They would like to get out of this and get on with their business. But if look at the lack of hesitation to strike American bases. If Iran was scared, they wouldn't be acting this decisively. They're willing to go the distance. How many other nations are willing to go to that same distance? And there's the danger, because what happens if the United States gets dragged into a conflict with Iran? First of all, if we operate under the misconception that the Iranians fear regime change and fear running out of assets, we could get involved in an air campaign of limited duration that doesn't succeed in its objectives. And at the end of the day, now we've exhausted our ability regionally to strike. Iran continues to hit our bases, pulling us back. And now we have to mobilize troops. I don't know what the war plan is today for Iran. I know what the war plan was back in 1985 because I helped write the intelligence annex to it. Hundreds of thousands of troops, forcible entry in the ports of Chabahar, Bandar Abbas, airport seizure, all that thing. Hundreds of thousands of troops that we don't have right now. So we'd have to mobilize, train, and then move them in and carry about forcible entry into Iran in contested space. This is a years-long endeavor. And
do you think
when this plan was briefed to Trump back after the global hawk was shot down, they told Trump at that time, there's no guarantee that we win this one, meaning that even if we do all this and send the forces in, we still may be beat because the Iranians have prepared for this. So the danger here is that the United States, operating off of misperceptions, overcommits. And the real risk here is, if you remember early on when people talked about Fordo and the fact that U.S. conventional weapons wouldn't be able to take it out, the White House released a piece of information with non-attribution, but it was linked to the White House, a White House source, that Trump is considering the use of a tactical nuclear weapon against Fordo. Do you remember seeing that piece of report? It was there from the White House. They didn't, because they came in with 6 or 12. I forget how many. I think it was 12 massive ordnance they dropped out. But the thing is, what that shows is that when the United States runs out of conventional resources, we're not going to admit defeat. And then if we escalate, there's the potential of nuclear weapons being used. And that changes the game tremendously. So you're 100% correct. This conflict could spin out of control and take on proportions that are unimaginable at this moment. The collapse of the global economy, the introduction of nuclear war, which then could resonate, throughout the region and around the world. So anybody who treats this as a game, sort of a video game, this is sort of cool. America's dropping bombs on Iran. Oh, look, missiles in the sky. Guys, we're talking about potential end of the world kind of stuff here. So I think it's in everybody's interest to see this conflict come to as rapid an end as possible.
Would you say except China and Russia? China, anything to distract their rival, their enemy, the US, is beneficial for those two countries. Spreading the US thin would allow Russia to keep taking Ukrainian territory and could allow China to further prepare for potentially taking Taiwan. Do you think those two countries could support Iran enough so Iran continues this war for longer? And potentially try to drag the US in, strategically benefiting them?
Nah. First of all, China doesn't think in those terms. China thinks in terms of global supply chain, economic dominance. And any businessman will tell you that the key to business success is stability. Businesses don't thrive in unstable environments. Stability is the key. So the Chinese want stability. The fact of the matter is China could take Taiwan anytime they wanted to take Taiwan. They could take it today. There's nothing that we can do to stop them. But China's not looking for a military solution. They're looking for a longer-term, peaceful integration of Taiwan. And so they're not. Russia's going to do what it's going to do in Ukraine no matter what we do, because we've already thrown the kitchen sink into the fight. And unless we're willing to get directly involved with what troops, by the way, so Russia's not sitting there going, oh, if we do this, we might have an advantage in Ukraine. They already have the advantage in Ukraine. Russia already has a war plan for Ukraine. They're winning this war. Ukraine's losing. Look at the dysfunction in NATO. Look at what happened to G7. Zelensky's on the outs. Russia doesn't need Iran to do anything to help its position in Ukraine. In fact, it's a complication, because what Russia really needs in Ukraine is for America to get on the side of ending this war by letting Ukraine know that there won't be a lifeline. But right now, it's very difficult for Russia and the United States to have a dialogue because of what's going on in the Middle East. So I believe Russia wants this. Plus, remember, Russia isn't a nation that projects military power like the United States does. That's not how they operate. When it comes to Iran, Russia's number one objective is to secure the north-south economic corridor from St. Petersburg to Tehran. That's a game changer for them. Bypasses the Suez Canal, shortens the length of the trade routes. It gives it access to warm water ports. And this can't happen if there's a state of war. China just opened up the new Silk Road, bringing in trains out of Western China into Tehran. None of this functions when there's war, instability, dysfunction. So I don't think Russia and China are sitting there plotting behind the scenes to keep this thing going. I think both of them are desperate to see this war come to an end, because that brings about the stability they need to focus on their priority, which is BRICS, a Eurasian Economic Union, strengthening of Chinese control of global supply lines, diversification of the Russian economy. None of this happens as long as there's this conflict taking place between Israel and Iran, and now particularly the States and Iran.
And another thing we discussed in our last interview is Hezbollah. Hezbollah refrained from joining this war, which was a surprise to me, and I think it was a surprise to you as well. They still haven't joined the war. What does that mean for Lebanon? I asked the same question to the ambassador, to the Israeli ambassador. I haven't been able to speak to any Lebanese politicians yet. I would love to get their take when things calm down. But a lot of people in Lebanon are talking about, and are starting to become more vocal about some sort of normalization of relations between Lebanon and Israel. I know it's too early for that, but at least those discussions are being made in the open now. And what does that mean for Hezbollah? Could we see Hezbollah give up their weapons?
Again, this is anecdotal, and I always hate to go off of anecdotal information, but as you've pointed out, it's very difficult to get to speak to primary sources. I communicate via WhatsApp with several families in Beirut, one in particular, and they say everything's calm right now. I mean, they're very nervous about this, but this is a good calm, meaning that the people of Lebanon enjoy not being the center of the volatility. A couple days ago, there were reports about Israel bombing sites in southern Lebanon because they observed Hezbollah attempting to come back and reactivate some of their evacuated missile sites. A statement from Hezbollah made maybe a week ago said that they are not neutral in this conflict and that they could become involved. So I think from the Israeli perspective, if you can bring an end to this Israeli-Iranian conflict that brings about a resolution of the Gaza problem simultaneously, because there's some talk about that as well, you take away the any justification of Hezbollah continuing to posture as a resistance movement. And then Hezbollah reverts to a political party and turns in its weapons. So I think ultimately the goal of Lebanon is to get Hezbollah to give up its weapons, to conform with United Nations Security Council resolutions, and for Lebanon to become part of become a regional neighbor in good standing. But understand they're surrounded by Israel on one side, Syria with the new Syrian government on the other, and then Turkey and what's going on. So Lebanon's not going to be a center of volatility. Lebanon's going to be a nation where compromises are going to have to be made so they can peacefully coexist with such a diverse range of neighbors.
There could be a utopian outcome out of this. If the war ends and Iran is weakened, which I think you disagree with that assumption, but if Iran is weakened, that means their proxies will no longer target Israel. There'll be some sort of uneasy peace between the two countries, and that could lead to, potentially more peace in the Middle East. We don't have that battle, that struggle between not only Iran and Israel, but also Iran and their neighbor Saudi. Is that a possibility? Could that be a positive outcome from all this?
I thought we had that positive outcome a year or so ago when China brokered a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran to achieve just that outcome, to reduce pressures, reduce tensions. So that possibility was already on the table. It's the United States and Israel that opted out of that. You don't need to defeat Iran to get to that outcome. Iran, at full strength, was ready to move in that direction and had moved in that direction. And had the United States finalized a deal with Iran on its nuclear program, I think we would be seeing peaceful coexistence. The United Arab Emirates is ready to have good trade relations with Iran. So is the rest of the Gulf. Many of them do have good trade relations. They just take place under the shadow with dhows going back and forth across the. Go to Abu Dhabi someday and go down, walk along the port, and take a look at the dhows that are parked there. They all come from Iran. So we don't need to defeat Iran to achieve. It could be defeating Iran. I'm not saying it's impossible. Anything's possible. Iran's not a undefeatable nation, but it would take a lot of resources, a lot of time, into a lot of destruction. Iran's not going to go gently into that good night. The idea that you defeat Iran without